Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of Truth and Reconciliation Week. My name is Matthew Roberts, and I'm an Indigenous Associate at RBC, working in technology and operations. I'll be introducing our guest speaker, Stephen Augustine, who is the Hereditary Chief at the Mi'kmaq Grand Council and the Associate Vice President of Indigenous Affairs at Unmaki College at Cape Breton University. So let's begin with this session, as I'm pleased to announce the Mi'kmaq creation story.
Kwe, weldasi bejidayo ola hachiksaduyo agnodemono. I am happy that you are here today to listen to the creation story from a Mi'kmaq perspective. This story has been passed down by word of mouth for many, many generations. It explains how the world began for the Mi'kmaq people in Eastern Canada, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and part of Quebec. So we lived there and have lived there for thousands of years. So the Mi'kmaq creation story has 7 levels. I'm trying to move my screen, but it's not moving. Oh, okay, there it is. The Mi'kmaq creation story has 7 levels of creation. I'll name them off quickly, but I'll go and explain each of them in detail for you in a minute. Kisulk is the giver of life who made the world. Niskam is grandfather's son. Usitkamu is Mother Earth. Glooscap is our culture hero who represents leadership. Nugami is our grandmother, the wisdom keeper. It's the grandmother of Glooscap. Nedawansam is a nephew of Glooscap, who represents strength and vision. And Niganaganim Kuzisk, even I have a hard time saying it, so I shortened it to Niganesk, the mother, Glooscap's mother, who brings love and sharing. So Gizulk is what we call the giver of life, the Great Spirit. And it represents everything that we see around us when we look out and see the sky, the clouds, the sun, the moon, the earth, the waters, the trees, plants, animals, and fish, and so on. So giver of life is responsible for giving all of that. It gave us our lives. Then we look at grandfather's son. Niskam, we call it in Mi'kmaq, is grandfather's son. We thank grandfather for giving us our spirits. And our spirits are our shadows. In Mi'kmaq, we say Jija'amij, which means those dark things that are following us around. And in our culture and in our language, it represents our ancestors that have gone into the spirit world. So they are looking after us, they are following us around, and they are taking care of us. So we are not alone. So we thank grandfather son for putting spirit into our lives. Then we look down to Mother Earth, Usitkamu. We are grateful that Mother Earth is here because we rely on her for everything that we need in order to survive and to live. So Mother Earth gave us the birds, plants, animals, and fish, gave us water, gave us fire, gave us earth and wind. So we are grateful that Mother Earth, sorry, I'm trying to move there it is. Usitkamu is our Mother Earth, and she provides us with all the necessities of life through the birds, plants, animals, and fish. So we are thankful Mother Earth sustains our lives. So giver of life, Gizulk, gives life. Grandfather son puts spirit into our lives by giving us our shadows. And then Mother Earth sustains us with all the elements of her creation on Mother Earth, the birds, plants, animals, and fish. And then one day, a bolt of lightning hit the earth, and it caused the shape of a person from the elements of Mother Earth. the leaves, the plants, the fur, bones, fish bones, animals, everything. So this person was created out of the elements of Mother Earth, and he was in the shape of a human. His legs were in the direction of the rising sun to the west. His head was in the direction of the rising sun, the east. His feet in the setting sun to the west, and his arms were outstretched, one to the north and one to the south. And it wasn't until the passing of another winter that another bolt of lightning hit the same spot where he was laying, and he was given his fingers, his toes, and all the 7 sacred entities in his head. Our elders teach us that he was given 2 ears to listen from the goodness of his heart, 2 eyes to look at people from the goodness of his heart, 2 holes in the nose to sense his place, and also to respect and honor everybody else's place, and 1 hole in the mouth to be able to take the sacred breath when he was born, and to be able to take in the water that comes from Mother Earth and the food that comes from Mother Earth, which belongs to everybody. And so Glooscap was happy that he could, but he was still stuck on Mother Earth, just like babies are stuck on cradle boards where their mother carries them around. So Glooscap had to observe the world around him for the passing of another winter until the 3rd bolt of lightning hit the spot where he was laying, and he was given his freedom, and he stood up and he looked up and he says, "Oh, giver of life, thank you for giving me my life. Grandfather, son, thank you for putting spirit into my life. And thank you, Mother Earth, for causing my creation." And so Glooscap traveled to discover his world. He traveled west, he traveled south and north, and then he traveled back to where he was given his creation. And as he was standing there where he was created, he looked up in the sky and he saw an eagle flying around. And finally, this eagle came down and it sat in front of him. And the eagle said, "I am Gitpu. I am the messenger for the giver of life, Grandfather, Son, and Mother Earth. I have come to tell you that you're going to be joined by the rest of your family to help you understand your place in this world." So Glooscap was happy that the eagle came to join him. And as the eagle flew up into the sky, a feather fell from the eagle. And the feather represents our connection with the eagle, Gitpu, and the feather is our sacred element of a gift from the eagle, the messenger. So whenever we want to speak to giver of life, Grandfather, Son, or Mother Earth, or the spirits of our ancestors, we take the feather and we speak with the eagle feather. So Glooscap turned around, and as he turned around, he saw an old woman. This is a picture of my grandmother. She lived to be 100 years old. Her name was Agnes Thomas. She came from Lennox Island in Prince Edward Island. And Glooscap asked her, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" She said, "I was a rock on the ground, Gundu. And dew formed over this rock, and with the help of the giver of life, gave me, and Mother Earth gave me a life of an old woman, already wise and knowledgeable." So she told Glooscap, "If you respect my wisdom and knowledge, I will help you survive on Mother Earth. I will help you understand your place here. I will teach you about everything you need to know about animals, birds, plants, and fish, and the characteristics and behavior of our earth itself, the wind, the rain, the thunder spirits, and everything you need to know to survive on Mother Earth." So Glooscap was happy his grandmother came. There was a little animal scurrying along, and he says, "Abistanuj, my brother." He said, "I have a favor to ask of you. Grandmother and I need to continue to live. Would you be able to help us out?" And Abistanuj said, "Yes." And Glooscap and grandmother at this point started to rely on the animals for their survival, because Glooscap explained to Abistanuj, with your skin, you can provide us with our clothing. With your flesh, we can have meat to eat. And from your bones, we can obtain our tools, and your organs for our medicine. So Abistanuj agreed, And uh, grandmother asked Glooscap to gather all the sparks that were left over from the bolts of lightning that hit the earth and put them in the circle and bring them in the middle where he was given his creation. And she asked Glooscap to bring 7 pieces of wood and build a wigwam over those sparks. And she said, call our cousin Whirlwind to come here. And Whirlwind arrived, and a fire ignited. And for us, this is called the Chibukdo, or the Great Spirit Fire. So they cooked their first meal of meat on the fire, and they were able to enjoy the rest of their lives by relying on the animals. This was their first agreement with the animals. You may say it could be the first treaty that our people made with the animals. And then one day, Glooscap was walking along the shore, along this sweet-smelling grass. We call it sweet grass. And lo and behold, a young man stood up from there. And Glooscap asked him, who are you? Where did you come from? The young man said, I am Nedawansam. I am your sister's son. I am your nephew. I come from the ocean when Whirlwind passed by and caused the waters to roil up. Foam began to form on the waters, and it rested on this tall, sweet-smelling grass we call sweet grass. And with the help of the giver of life, Grandfather, Son, and Mother Earth, gave me a life of a young man, already strong, and I have eyes from our ancestors. I'm looking at you. And Glooscap realized that this young person is looking at him, so he had to live a life in such a way that he leaves a way of life for the young people to follow, a way of life that is good for them, that they will eat good food and they will treat each other with kindness. And so this is how Glooscap treated the young people, and the young people were always looking at us as adults. And we today have to live accordingly. So you will follow us and do all the good things that we do. So you will have a legacy of survival. And then Glooscap one day, while grandmother and the nephew were out gathering some more wood for the fire, he was sitting by the fire by himself, and a woman came and sat beside him, and he said, Gauchinan Quis, are you cold, my son? She said, who are you? And it wasn't she, it was he. He said, who are you? Asked this woman. And the woman said, I am your mother. She said, I was a leaf on a plant, on a tree. Early this morning, this leaf fell to the ground and dew formed over this leaf. And with the help of the giver of life, Grandfather, Son, and Mother Earth, gave me a life of a woman. I am strong. I bring strength for my children. I bring all the colors of the world. I bring love, that you will rely on each other, take care of each other, look after one another. And so Glooscap was happy his mother came into the world. He called upon his nephew to gather the food from the plants and the trees, the fruits and the vegetables, and grandmother prepared a feast in honor of Glooscap's mother's arrival to the world. And I just want to mention that when the young person arrived from the ocean and the sweetgrass, he asked the fish from the ocean to offer themselves, and the fish agreed. And so we had agreements with the birds, which Glooscap, when he arrived with the eagle, grandmother arrived with the animals, and then the nephew arrived with the fish, and now the mother arrived with the food from the plants and the trees. So we have these agreements with early on in our stories, in our creation story, because the mother came from a leaf of a plant. So the eagle one day came back to visit Glooscap, and he told Glooscap that he has to leave this world and grandmother has to leave this world with him. And his mother Niganaganim Kuzis and his nephew, Nedawansum, will have to look after the spirit fire. And the fire itself represents the first 4 levels of creation. And the eagle told Glooscap that one day out of that fire, a spark will fly, and when it lands on the earth, a woman is going to be created. 6 more sparks will fly out and create 6 more women altogether, making 7 women. And then later on, 7 more sparks will fly out of the fire and will create 7 men. And together they will form 7 families. And the Mi'kmaq is one of those families. And the Cree, the Innu, the Abenaki, the Wampanoags, the Blackfoot are the rest of the other families. And each one of us have our own version of our own creation. And this is the Mi'kmaq perspective, or the Mi'kmaq version of our creation. So in order to honor grandmother who owed her existence from the rock on the ground, we will collect 28 rocks and put them inside of our sweat lodge. But we will heat the rocks in the fire first, 28 of them. 7 rocks to represent the first 7 levels of creation: giver of life, grandmother; giver of life, grandfather, son; Mother Earth; Glooscap, our leadership, our grandmothers, our nephews, and our mothers. There's 7 sacred directions: above, within us, below us; to the east, Glooscap; to the south, grandmother; to the west, the young people; and to the north, our mothers. So we will build a lodge, which we call Anigom, which is the womb of our Mother Earth. We crawl back inside of our Mother Earth into what we call a sweat lodge. And the 7 representatives of the 7 original families go inside the sweat lodge and sit around in a circle while they call upon the 7 rocks to be brought in, and the door is closed and water is poured on the rocks and steam is created. And this is what we call our sweat lodge ceremony, because it is to honor our grandmother who comes from the rocks. Out in the east, we call the sweat rocks grandmothers. In order not to forget the significance and the meaning of the nephew, we take the hair of our Mother Earth, which is the sweetgrass, and we braid it, and we light the sweetgrass on the chibukto, or the great spirit fire, and we smudge and blow the smoke to the giver of life, and thank you for giving us our life. Grandfather, son, thank you for giving us our shadows, our spirits. Mother Earth, thank you for sustaining us. To the east, Glooscap; to the south, grandmothers; to the west, the young people; to the north, our mothers. So this is what we call the sweetgrass smudging ceremony. And we also smudge ourselves. We clean our head. We clean our ears to open them so we can listen from the goodness of our heart. We smudge our eyes to look from the goodness of our heart. We smudge our nose to be able to have respect and dignity and honor for everybody else that is alive around us, including the birds, plants, animals, and fish. And then last of all, we smudge our mouth, and then our heart, our arms, and then the rest of our body. Then, in order not to forget the mother, the significance of the mother who comes from a plant of a leaf, we take the tobacco, the plant, the tobacco, and turn it into our tobacco. And we also have tobacco offering ceremonies that we give. Every time we give thanks to the giver of life, we put a little bit of tobacco in the fire, and we say, thank you, giver of life, grandfather, son, Mother Earth, our leadership, our elders, our young people, and our mothers. 7 sacred directions all over again. So this is our tobacco offering ceremony. And then we have what we call Dama'an. And this is a sacred pipe ceremony. As you can recall, the stone comes from the grandmother, or the grandmother who came from the stone. So we take the stone and shape it into a pipe. And then the stem comes from wood, and our mother comes from a leaf of a plant. So we take the spirit of the grandmother, the stone, and the spirit of the mother, and we join them together to form the sacred pipe. And this is what we call the Mi'kmaq pipe, the Ma'an. And this is how we explain the Mi'kmaq creation story. And so as part of our ceremony, we have wampum belts, we have drumming and singing and dancing and feasting and giving gifts. That is all part of our the ceremonies that we do. And that is what we call the Mi'kmaq creation story. Well, Alio, thank you. I am done. I think I'm going to be joined by Matthew next to help us close and have some questions, I guess.
Thank you for the story. That was quite interesting. I know I learned a lot myself. Coming from a different tribe, it's interesting to hear some of the stories, especially around creation, that some of the other Seven Nation tribes have. So thank you again for sharing.
Thank you.
So I do actually have a question myself. I know you mentioned the sweetgrass and tobacco. I was wondering if there was any of the other sacred medicines that's used in the creation story, or anything that might be surrounding it.
Sacred medicines?
Yeah, so I know there's sweetgrass, tobacco. I know a few of us, different tribes have different sacred medicines that we use. So I wasn't certain if there was other ones that's commonly used in ceremonies for the Mi'kmaq.
Well, I mean, we burn cedar as well. We burn sage. We call it sea sage. But more recently, contemporary-wise, we borrow the buffalo sage that comes from out west, from your tribal groups, and so we use that to burn because sweetgrass does not always burn easily. On a muggy day, when it's damp, it won't stay burning. You have to keep lighting it. But sage buffalo sage, mountain sage, I mean, will stay lit all the time because it's nice and dry, and it'll stay dry even when it's humid.
Okay. So yeah, and we have a question coming in here asking, something similar, wanting to know if sage is burned, which I think you just went over. Because we're in Canada, how does it affect? How does the weather affect some of these ceremonies?
Well, I've done ceremony all across North America. I've done peyote ceremonies with the Huicholes in Mexico. I have done sweat lodges with the Lakota people, Arvel Looking Horse and his father Stanley in the Lakota territory. And I've done sweat lodges in British Columbia, Lillooet. And I've been to the Yukon, Alaska, all across, and everybody has their own ceremonies in their different ways. And the door is kind of, a sweat lodge will face in a different direction, or sometimes the ceremonies are done in houses under the ground. And so there's a lot of diversity among our people as we go across the continent and in North America. And the Inuit up north, they don't do sweat lodges. They don't have eagle feathers, and they have different instruments and objects and material for their ceremonies.
Thank you. We got another question coming in here. What was the sacred pipe wrapped in? There's a lot of color. What is it?
The pipe is wrapped with dyed porcupine quills. It's porcupine quills that have been dyed with natural colors using plants and vegetables. And so it's wrapped with porcupine quills that are flattened and woven together to stay together.
That's really cool. I'm always a fan of the coloring and just using natural vegetation and things from the environment for the dyes instead of all the chemicals we see nowadays for things.
Yes.
Another question here, and the pictures were really beautiful. A reminder of the power of your words. I have heard that the creation story can take 7 days to tell. How long would the Mi'kmaq creation story take to tell in full?
Exactly the same, 7 days. Each day was devoted to one element, like the giver of life. And after that story is told, they would break and drum and dance and have a big feast. And next day they would start with the grandfather's son and all the significance and meaning and an explanation. And a lot of it is moral education in an oral context. Our elders, our grandfathers, grandmothers are teaching us lessons of life, how we should behave with each other, with the animals, with the birds and the fish, and how do we maintain that balance for our survival. And the ceremonies that we do is our negotiation for that survival. And so, again, Mother Earth, I mean, so we give thanks every day for these 7 different elements of creation. And on the last day, that's when we do the sweat lodge ceremony and the pipe ceremony and the smudging with the sweetgrass and the tobacco offering and the fire. The fire, when you make a fire, it's a ceremony in itself. There are fire makers and fire keepers all across Canada and who devote their life just to look after those fires. And then we have the lodge keepers and the pipe carriers. So each one has their own function, and some of us do all of them together.
Nice. And sorry if I missed it, but does this ceremony take place every year, or is it just whenever the ceremony needs to be told?
Well, among our people, in the springtime of the year, we would gather because our people out here in the east, when winter comes, nobody stays along the shore or the coastal areas. Everybody goes up the river, and we divide into these little clan groups. And when spring comes, when we hear the firefly and we see the lightning, it's a time when the birch bark is ready to peel. And so we peel the birch bark and we make more canoes and we head out and we save enough bark to cover our wigwam frames that we left at the mouth of the river. So we go back to the mouth of the river in the springtime to wait for the fish to come up and enter the river. And this is where our food comes to us. We never run around and chase our food. So in the springtime, that's when we do the celebration of gathering the family back together and seeing the old people and the young people and new people and young people. And then they get married, I guess, in the modern context, every spring. And then they go back and maybe next year they will come back with a little baby. And so this is how the life kind of moves back and forth with our people. And so a lot of ceremonies are done in the spring, all through the summer and into the fall. But I've witnessed midwinter ceremonies as well. I've sweated in Saddle Lake in minus 35 weather with my Cree friend.
No. That sounds interesting.
It is.
What is the most meaningful ceremony? Or I guess maybe if you can't, if there's not one that's the most meaningful, what is your favorite ceremony?
Well, I find fasting is one is a ceremony itself. I mean, to earn to earn the pipe, to be able to keep a ceremony, to become a sweat lodge keeper. There's fasting that you have to be alone, you have to be by yourself, you have a fire to look after. Some cultures and traditions give you water, some don't. I've done fasting for quite a while without water or food, and to earn some of the things that I do ceremonial. But the pipe ceremony for me is one of the best and most meaningful elements, because it explains the whole creation story in the whole ceremony. The prayer itself is the creation story.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a good question. We have someone asking, who would be your god? So I I guess this is requires a bit of explanation around what exactly our creator is.
Yes, there's a big difference in terms of our concept of a god. Most of the cultures came and originated in Europe. They have a long history among the Greeks philosophers, the Roman philosophers, and then the French, and so on and so forth. And each of those cultures have a story about their own creation. And the Christians have a God that created the world, and God also created Jesus Christ, to be a savior for the Christian cultures in Europe. But then when they came to North America, indigenous people didn't have a God. I mean, they called us godless savages. But we ourselves have an understanding that there is somebody responsible, or something, a mysterious element we call Gizulk. The word itself refers to you have been created, you are being created, you're going to continue to be created if you wake up 2 years from now and you're still alive and your world is still there. So Gizulk is the idea that you've been put here by a mysterious element. We call it the Great Spirit, or giver of life. So that is kind of an equivalent to the European perspective of what they call God. And for us, we don't see it as a image of a human being looking down on us from the sky or something like that. It's just something so powerful. We have no equal to it. No human can equal the power of the Great Spirit.
That was a great explanation.
And our belief system is not called religion, it's called spirituality. And how we express that spirituality, the ceremonies that we do, is our way of negotiating for our survival. So we're always giving thanks to those 7 sacred entities, saying, thank you for giving us this animal, thank you for that fish, thank you. And we're always apologizing and doing ceremony with the elements that we take from Mother Earth for our survival.
That was a great explanation. I'm not sure I've heard a better one myself.
Thank you.
Another question here. How did a leaf become a human?
By the Great Spirit, by the magic and transformation of giver of life, Gizulk, with water, dew from on the leaf, and with the help of Grandfather Sun putting spirit into it, and Mother Earth allowing all of that to unfold as a woman. And so a lot of our medicines are looked after by our grandmothers, and a lot of our medicines come from plants.
How old are some of these traditions?
I would say, I mean, we have an archaeological site here in Atlantic Canada. It's called the Debert site near Truro, Nova Scotia. archaeologically, it's been dated around over 11,000 years old. So that's almost 9,000 years before Jesus Christ was born. And it's even 4 or 5,000 years older than the Egyptian civilization, the pyramids. So
Mhm.
it's quite old, and everything was passed down through oral tradition. So the ceremony that I'm doing today is not an exact replica of the ceremonies that ancestors did years and years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, just touching on that, do you want to maybe expand on, yeah, how our stories are actually passed down through just oral communication, and who tells them, and how it how it
Yes,
goes through?
I'm a hereditary chief. My father, Patrick Joseph, his father was Basil Tom. Basil's father was Tom Augustine. Tom's father was Noel. Noel's father was Peter, and Peter's father was Michael Augustine. And Michael Augustine was baptized on August 28, 1747. And before that, his name was Alguimo, just one name, to be like a loon. Guimo is the name of the loon. And so we've transformed from one name. An animal is our clan, the loon clan, Guimo. And you'll see the treaties that were signed in the 1700s, somebody using the name Guimo and a totem of a loon, a diving loon, uh, on the treaties, used as a symbol to represent. So these are the stories that have been passed down to me. That's why they call me a hereditary chief. These creation stories and these ceremonies have been passed down my generation of family. And I learned from my great grandmother, Isabel Augustine, and my great grandfather, Simon Joe Simon from Elsie Wukduk. And then their son, Johnny Simon, which is my mother's father. And then Agnes Thomas, my father's mother, who grew to be 100 years old, or aged to be 100 years old. And she was born in 1898. And her husband was born in 1857, Basil Tom Augustine.
Wow, that's quite the history.
So
Yeah,
that's,
you can see how, yeah, oral traditions are passed down like that.
yes. So they're the ones that taught me the Mi'kmaq creation story and the meaning of those ceremonies, the pipe ceremony, the sweat lodge ceremony, from a Mi'kmaq context.
We have another question here asking about smudging, and what is smudging?
Smudging is more or less the smoke from lighting the sweetgrass or the sage. It actually represents the spirit person who is conducting the ceremony. It's his words. He's taken the responsibility to represent the collective words of the people that are standing around in the circle with him. And so he offers all of our words to the giver of life. Well, Ali, thank you, to grandfather, son, and offering the smoke from the sage or the sweetgrass or the cedar, and then to Mother Earth, to our leaders in the east, to our grandmothers to the south, our young people to the west, and our mothers to the north. So this is our collective words. And then when we cleanse our head, our mind, we open our ears, we supposed to clear our eyes if we were emotional and crying. The smudge is supposed to wipe away the tears so we can look from the goodness of our heart. And our nose is when we sense our place. And our elders teach us that children, when they go to a different house for a sleepover, he'll come home and say, well, they have different soap over there. They cook different food. Everything smells different over there. And our elders, our grandmothers would say, it's the young ones that can determine if there's a stranger arriving. They, first of all, don't recognize, and the person smells differently. So they'll run home and tell their parents or grandparents or older brother, there's somebody over there, you know. And so it was a safety mechanism for our people, the eyes and ears, nose, and mouth.
It's really interesting. Yeah, smudging is used across many of our indigenous cultures here in Canada.
Yeah.
We have one last question here. In this story, there was no father or sister. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's equivalents to grandmother. There's a grandfather. There's equivalents to the mother. There's a father. There's a equivalence to the nephew. There's a niece. There's always a representation of the two. So the creation story is almost like balanced out with the giver of life, grandfather, son, and mother earth, the leader who happens to be a man. But in our language, there is no word that determines whether the individual was a man or a woman. But I think after the introduction of Christianity, that person became a man. So Glooscap, our leader, has a tendency to be the chiefs who were men mostly early on in time. But as we go forward, come today, we have a lot of woman chiefs. We even have a woman national chief today. And so there is a balancing out going on in terms of our roles as hereditary chiefs or national chiefs or First Nations chief in a band and so on. So there is a balancing out. And so in the creation story, I read it as the grandmother also represents the grandfather, and the mother also represents the father, and the same with the nephew, also represents the niece. And it's not said in there, and it's not explained in there. But when the elders were telling these stories, they explained those elements more clearer. I only had so many minutes to tell this story, not 7 days.
Well, we appreciate you telling the story. And I think that will bring us to the end of this session. And thank you so much, Stephen, for everything you've done to support Truth and Reconciliation Week. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you've learned a lot and had a great time through these sessions and through this week of Truth and Reconciliation. With that, I believe we'll close it off.
Thank you so much. And the eagle feather is with you. Walalio.
Bonjour, good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge that since I am in Winnipeg today, I am Treaty 1 territory on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Ojibwe peoples. I recognize we all work in different places and we live and gather and organize on various traditional territories. As this is the first Truth and Reconciliation Week, and it comes to an end, there are a few people that we'd like to give our sincerest gratitude for and their involvement in ensuring this week was supported and funded. Truth and Reconciliation Week is a national initiative made possible with support of staff at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, the NCTR Governing Circle, the NCTR Survivors Circle, NCTR Steering Committee, and all staff have been integral to building this week. Thank you to our friends at AMP for their producing talents and media styles for communication support. Truth and Reconciliation Week was made possible with the generous support of funders, sponsors, and partners from across the country. We give a big thank you to the Government of Canada for their support and thank our presenting sponsor, RBC. This program became a reality with their contributions and those made by the NIB Trust Fund, Hubalo, the Winnipeg Foundation, Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and to the provinces and territories that contributed in a meaningful way, and particularly to the many provincial ministries of education, and organizations for their collaboration, understanding, and support. Thank you to our media supporters from APTN, CBC, Facebook, NFB, CBC Manitoba, Tele-Quebec en Place, Wapakoni, No Indigenous History, CBC Kids News. Thank you to our elders, knowledge keepers, speakers, and the survivors who participated in this week's program, as well as the Assembly of First Nations. I give special thank you to Elder Bone and to our drummer, Ray Stevenson, for the opening us in a good way, the Sacred Fire Keepers, and to the Honorable Murray Sinclair, thank you for your presentation as a knowledge keeper and for always sharing your wisdom with us. Lastly, I want to thank Hubalo, the platform on which we were able to share this wonderful week of sessions. Truth and Reconciliation Week content will be available on the Hubalo platform for weeks to come. And we encourage teachers to log in to access content and educational materials as the conversations in your classrooms continue. With this, we come to an end of Truth and Reconciliation Week. Thank you for all being present this week and for joining us as such an attentive audience. To the teachers, students, those committed to lifelong learning, and everyone who participated in this week, miigwech for your commitment and learning and growing as part of your journey of reconciliation. I hope you have all had a great day and will continue to do so the rest of the week. Thank you. Miigwech.